going to start us with a grounding just to get our bodies kind of reconnected with ourselves. So I'm going to offer a grounding for all of us. If you want to find a comfortable position for your body, whether you're sitting or you're standing, do your best to feel your feet underneath you. Should be way more comfortable now. And I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. Feel your feet holding you up. Feel the floor underneath you. Now, bring your attention to your breath. Notice the sensation of the breath entering and leaving your body. Take a moment to fully connect with your breath, allowing it to anchor you in the present moment. As you continue to breathe, imagine a beautiful, serene place in nature. It could be a beach, a forest, or a meadow. Visualize yourself standing in this peaceful setting, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of nature. Take a moment to observe your surroundings. Notice the colors, the textures, and the gentle movements of the natural elements around you. Feel the warmth of the sun on your skin or the coolness of a gentle breeze. Now, imagine a small stream flowing nearby. This stream represents the flow of your thoughts and emotions. As you watch the stream, notice any thoughts or worries that come up. Acknowledge them, but let them gently float away, just like leaves floating downstream. Allow yourself to release any negative or stressful thoughts, letting them dissolve into the flowing water. Feel a sense of lightness and relief as you let go of any mental burdens. Now shift your attention to your body. Scan your body from head to toe, noticing any areas of tension or discomfort. As you become aware of these sensations, imagine a warm, healing light surrounding those areas, melting away any tension or discomfort. Feel this healing light spreading throughout your entire body, bringing a deep sense of relaxation and rejuvenation. Allow yourself to fully surrender to this healing energy, knowing that it is restoring balance and harmony within you. Now take a minute to express gratitude for this opportunity to reset your mind and body. Gratitude for the present moment, for the breath that sustains you, and for the ability to let go and start anew. When you are ready, slowly bring your awareness back to the room. Wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently open your eyes and take a moment to notice how you feel after this reset meditation. And carry this sense of calm and clarity with you for the rest of the afternoon. sometimes it's good to reset our bodies and our nervous system. We're always running to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. We don't give ourselves a moment to reset our energy, reset our nervous system, reset our emotions from that text message you got, from that voice memo you got, from that email, even though you said you were out of office till Monday. So I thought it would be good for us to come back to ourselves because this isn't just about talking about all of the models that are possible. This is also about acknowledging that you all need to be. And I think it's healthy to organically allow that to intersect with the work that we're doing because the work will always be there and we have to take better care of ourselves. So I am going to pass it to my friend Doug, I think, who is going to offer a little information about the Lighthouse prompt that we gave to all of the speakers for each location. And I did the kickoff of the speaker series, and that recording will be available when I remake it. Because I did it in Puerto Rico, but I was also under duress. I did it in Puerto Rico while my friend and my dad were very traumatized. And so the clarity of the recording wasn't as great. So I'm going to do it when my nervous system is reset, and it's going to be great. But it's also, the transcript is available on the website. So if you want to read what I wrote, and Lee will be responding to that in some way. And this will also be a shared dialogue as well. But I'm going to turn it over to Doug. I don't think you're going to use this, right?
Nope.
Oh, well, no, you don't need to use it. Okay.
I don't need to use it.
No, you don't.
I don't need to disrupt you. So yes. So this is, we mentioned it yesterday, if you looked on the website, this is the Rolling Momentum Speaker Series. And this is embracing the idea that actually, if you want to really get into deep thoughts about a particular topic with multiple people, like a conference panel, one of the downsides is people say things and then they go, oh, I in the moment, what do I think about that? And it's hard to actually have a thoughtful conversation. So this is a rolling series. So there's 5 different speakers. As Calida said, she was the kickoff speaker, so she had no one else to respond to but herself. Thankfully, her conversations with herself are quite stimulating most of the time. So she gave a short response to the prompt, which I'll read in a second, in Puerto Rico. The transcript of that is online. Video will be as well. And then Lee gets to be our number 2, who will then respond to Calida. And then at each of the successive momentum sites, there is a different speaker. Their bios are all on the website. They're all amazing humans. They'll be responding to each other throughout. And then at the concluding webinar in September, we will have a section of that is all 5 of them together, getting to sort of debrief on those kinds of things. And undoubtedly, Calida and Lee will be like, but you all said great things. We didn't get to respond to you, which is great. So the bios of those speakers and the transcripts and recordings of what they say is all on the Momentum website. If you go to momentumrevolutions.com, click on speakers, it's all there. But I will read the prompt that was given to all of them just to put it in the air, and then I'll give it back to the 2 of them to do this here with you, and then you'll get to engage with them too and have some dialogue too later in the session. This prompt was created through a bunch of crowdsourcing. So we reached out to all sorts of different people, said, like, if you had 5 speakers who were going to do this, what would you want them to respond to at this moment? We got so many different points of view. We narrowed those down. And then I give, for the theater people in the room, give credit to Todd London, who I spoke to, who looked at some of them. I was like, well, really, you should take that one and that one, put them together. Does this sound familiar to the work you've been doing the last 2 days? And so we ended up with this speaker prompt, which we have been loosely calling the Lighthouse prompt, which I will read here for you now. Throughout history, artists and cultural experiences have been our lighthouses, cutting through deep darkness, revealing truth, illuminating futures we couldn't yet name. That light has never belonged to one person. A lighthouse is an ecosystem. It takes builders and visionaries to design it, fuel to keep it alive, people willing to tend it in the harshest conditions. It also takes smaller lights like lanterns and flashlights to reach what the largest beams can't, and a culture of navigators who know how to recognize that light, to trust it, and to move by it. So what happens when we look at our cultural landscape this way? Who are the builders, the keepers, the fuel, the travelers? What are we actually sustaining, and what are we letting go dark? What would it take for each of us to think differently about our roles, act differently within them, and then together illuminate a future that is alive, responsive, and always becoming. So there's a lot in there, and that is very on purpose to then allow these 5 amazing human beings to respond to that in different kinds of ways. I will not read Calida's transcription. If you haven't seen it, you can read it yourself. And with that, I hand it back over to you.
So thank you, Doug, for getting us started. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Every now and then you need someone whose career doesn't just span institutions, but also reshapes them. Lee is a human that I feel like is not just asking how do we make art, but also who gets to make it, who gets to lead it, and who gets to belong. And so I extracted some pieces that I felt were important to highlight about Lee. Lee is an internationally recognized arts leader, composer, librettist, dramaturg, educator, and strategist whose work has been transforming our field for more than 2 decades. As a non-binary artist and executive, they built a remarkable career at the intersection of artistic excellence, visionary leadership, and unapologetic equity. Their leadership journey has taken them through some of the nation's most influential institutions, including the Mellon Foundation, Minnesota Opera, and Lincoln Center. At every stop, Lee has done more than just lead the organizations. Lee has challenged the assumptions, opened doors, and created pathways for women, non-binary artists, and historically underrepresented communities to thrive. At Minnesota Opera, Lee founded the first department in the classical music world dedicated entirely to inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, fundamentally changing how the company approached artistry, education, and leadership. At Lincoln Center, they expanded equitable arts education for thousands of young people, forged groundbreaking partnerships across New York City, and pioneered innovative work in emerging technologies like virtual reality, AI, and motion capture. Their influence extends well beyond institutional leadership. Lee is also an acclaimed composer and librettist whose work has been supported by organizations including the Metropolitan Opera, Detroit Opera, National Black Theater, and American Opera Projects, with performances reaching across the U.S., the UK, and China. They are also a gifted teacher, a sought-after public intellectual, and a trusted advisor whose work continues to shape the future of arts education, philanthropy, and cultural leadership. Lee has consistently amplified voices that too often go unheard while helping build a more expansive vision for what our field can become. I think what I most admire about Lee is the way that they show up with such profound courage and generosity. They understand that equity can't just be a strategy. It has to be a practice that is living all the time, that is constantly activated. And leadership isn't just about authority, and it's about invitation. It's about offering. And I appreciate the way that Lee has spent their career really practicing that with intentionality. And we're super fortunate and blessed to have this opportunity to hear from Lee and their perspective around who owns the art? Who does it belong to? How do we continue building cultural lighthouses that are reflective of all communities, that are inclusive of all communities, that are accessible for all communities? So please join me in giving a warm momentum welcome to the extraordinary Lee Bynum.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good morning. I want to say a couple of things before I start talking. First, I actually can memorize a speech. However, I'm going to be reading today because I was planning to say something and then I spent the day with everybody yesterday and last night I wrote what I was going to say. So please bear with me a bit. Also, before I say anything else, I want to begin by thanking Calida, not only for inviting me to this conversation, but also for beginning where she did with the Lighthouse prompt. I thought it was really, really provocative. She invited us to imagine the artist as a lighthouse. More importantly, she reminded us that no lighthouse shines by itself. Every light depends upon architects, builders, keepers, navigators, fuel, and countless hands that make illumination possible. I've been thinking about that image ever since I read it. And this morning, I want to suggest that perhaps there is one more step backwards we might take. Because before there is a lighthouse, there is a shoreline. Before there is a keeper, there is a community. Before anyone builds a beacon, There are already people fighting their way through the dark. And I think that matters because I have come to believe that one of the quiet mistakes we make in the nonprofit arts industrial complex is assuming that the arts ecosystem begins with arts organizations. I don't think it does. I think it begins with culture itself. And culture always has existed, long before the institutions that purport to present, produce, or preserve them did. I've spent the last 20 years moving through our sector from a number of different valences. I've been an artist trying to bring new work into the world. I co-founded and led a small nonprofit theater company. I worked as a grant maker investing in museums, universities, libraries, archives, and performing arts organizations. I've served as a senior executive at Minnesota Opera, Lincoln Center, American Composers Forum, and Maestro Music. I've served on nonprofit boards for more than 20 years. And this fall, I began leading the graduate program in arts administration at the City University of New York, where my work will be to prepare the next generation of arts leaders. Those experiences look very different on paper. Yet over time, I began to notice something surprising. Artists asked why institutions struggle to connect with communities. Administrators wrestled with how to build sustainable organizations. Funders tried to determine how to invest for lasting impact. Boards asked how to govern wisely. Faculty wondered how to prepare students for a profession that seems to reinvent itself every decade. Different questions, different perspectives. Nevertheless, underneath them all, I eventually realized was the very same question. How do institutions remain worthy of the culture they exist to serve? It took me a long time to realize that I had been asking that question since the very beginning of my career. As a college student, when I co-founded the Harmony Theater Company in New York, I thought our work was to create new works. It wasn't, or at least it wasn't only that. Our mission required us to work alongside grassroots organizations serving neighborhoods across the city. We would meet with community leaders before we thought about seasons, before we talked about casting, before we imagined ancillary programming. Those conversations taught me something that has never left me. The community was not simply our audience. It was not simply the beneficiary of our work. It was not even our collaborator. The community was the context that gave the work its name. If we wanted to produce theater responsibly, we first had to understand what the community was experiencing, celebrating, fearing, grieving, and hoping for. Only then could we begin asking what kind of art ought to be made. Looking back, I realize now that I did not yet have the language for what I was learning. The arts ecosystem did not begin when people entered our theater. It already had begun long before anyone bought a ticket. It began in kitchens, in churches, in neighborhood barbershops and beauty salons, in family stories, in block parties, in lullabies, in protest songs, in the jokes elders teach children, almost without realizing they are teaching timing, rhythm, and performance, in dances learned from cousins, in traditions carried across generations. Long before anyone entered one of our institutions, they were already making culture. And that realization quietly has reshaped every position I've held since. Because once you understand that culture begins before institutions, you begin to ask very different questions of institutions. If Harmony Theater taught me where culture begins, the next chapter of my career taught me something equally important. Culture may begin before institutions, but institutions shape what culture is able to become. When I arrived at the Mellon Foundation after leading that small, under-resourced theater company, and I do mean under-resourced, I expected to discover that the greatest differences between organizations were financial. I was wrong, as I often am. Of course, resources matter. Anyone who has worked in this sector knows that they matter. And more importantly, we understand that money expands possibility, it creates stability, it buys time, it allows organizations to take risks they otherwise could not afford to take. What surprised me, though, was how often organizations with very different budgets struggled with remarkably similar problems. They struggled to listen. They struggled to adapt. They struggled to share authority. They struggled to align governance with mission. They struggled to distinguish preserving the institution from serving the public. Those were not simply financial problems. Those were leadership problems. They were governance problems, and ultimately they were cultural problems. That realization changed how I understood institutions. I stopped thinking of organizations primarily as buildings, budgets, or strategic plans, and I began thinking of them as collections of relationships. Relationships among artists, among administrators, among boards, among funders, among audiences, among communities. And once you begin seeing institutions as relationships rather than structures, something else becomes clear. Relationships are not permanent. They require tending, they require trust, they require humility, and they can disappear much more quickly than we imagine. I experienced it firsthand at Minnesota Opera. During my time there, we invested deeply in building relationships with communities that historically had not seen themselves reflected in opera. We created new artistic pipelines, we formed new partnerships, we expanded who was invited into conversations about what opera could be. We even purchased an incredibly expensive new performance venue to deposit us right in the middle of the community. And many of those efforts succeeded. Not because we had discovered a perfect strategy, but because a constellation of leaders across the organization believed that those relationships mattered. And then the leadership changed. And I'm not speaking about the chief executive, just enough people in decision-making capacities. And so enough priorities shifted, enough conversations stopped happening, enough assumptions quietly returned. And I realized something that has stayed with me ever since. Community trust is much easier to build than institutional memory. Relationships can be cultivated over years, but unless they become embedded in how an institution understands itself, they remain surprisingly fragile. That experience has repeated itself throughout my career. On nonprofit boards, in executive leadership, in consulting, in philanthropy, in higher education. All of this brings me to something I believe we sometimes misunderstand about our sector. Over the years, I've also had the privilege of working with cultural organizations and universities throughout Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. One of the gifts of that experience is that it reminds you of something that Americans sometimes forget. The way we organize our cultural institutions is not the only way they can be organized. The relationship among government, philanthropy, artists, audiences, higher education, and community looks different in different parts of the world. Even the definition of those terms aren't static. Different histories produce different assumptions produce different institutions. This clarifies that many of the structures we inherit are not inevitable. They are things we elect. And if they are elections, we can choose differently. That doesn't mean that every alternative is better, nor does it mean that we simply can import another country's model to our own. Every ecosystem grows within its own history. However, it does mean that we should stop confusing familiarity with necessity. Too often we describe our challenges as though they are primarily problems of funding. I have come to believe that they are more fundamentally problems of design. Business models are not simply financial systems. They are systems for making decisions. They determine what gets measured, what gets rewarded, what gets protected, whose voices carry authority, and perhaps most importantly, whose needs become the starting point for our work. When institutional sustainability becomes the first question instead of the last one, every other decision slowly reorganizes itself around protecting the institution rather than advancing the mission. And somewhere in that mission is bringing the art to the communities around us, right? But if the first question is, what does our community need us to become? Then sustainability is no longer the mission. It becomes one of the conditions that allows the mission to endure. That is a profoundly different way of understanding leadership. Not because it rejects business, not because it rejects fundraising, and not because it rejects governance. Quite the opposite. It asks those disciplines to remain accountable to something larger than themselves. It asks us to remember that institutions exist because culture does, not the other way around. This brings me to why we're here today. Over the past day and a half, many of us have been imagining new governance models, community boards, partner boards, mutual support boards, mission guardians, focus boards, holistic organization, all manner of magic and zaniness. I find that this work is deeply, deeply helpful, and not because I believe that one of these models will emerge as the answer, but because asking the question reminds us of something we too often forget. The way our organizations are structured is not a law of nature. It is a design choice, and design choices can be redesigned. But I want to offer one small provocation. I actually don't think this governance is the thing that we're trying to fix. Not after yesterday's session. I think governance is the symptom. The thing we're actually trying to redesign is the relationship between institutions and the people whose culture those institutions exist to steward. A board cannot solve that problem by itself. Neither can an executive director, neither can an artist, neither can a funder. And that is because governance is only one expression of a much deeper philosophy. Every governance model ultimately is trying to answer a handful of questions. Who gets to make decisions? Whose knowledge counts? Whose voices matter? To whom is this institution ultimately accountable? And perhaps the most important question of all, for whom does this institution exist? Those are not governance questions, those are philosophical questions. Every org chart is really a theory about relationships. Every board structure is a declaration about authority. Every budget is a declaration about priorities. Every strategic plan is a declaration about what future we are trying to create. Governance simply gives those beliefs organizational form. And that's why I think reforming boards, while important, is not enough. If we redesign the structure without redesigning the philosophy, the old assumptions simply will find new ways to express themselves. The boxes on the org chart may change, the power dynamics often do not. concepts and really get a sense of where that power sits and what kind of thing we're asking people to sacrifice. Because in some places it's authority, and some places it's the authority that comes with giving money, like especially as you work in the museum context. In other places, it's kind of releasing, being beholden to the sort of supply and demand that you're. I don't think it's always the easy answer of community, good, donors, bad kind of a moment. And I'm worried that like a lot of these conversations kind of sit in that space because those are both really loaded terms, right?
To your point about how we are preparing future arts administrators and individuals and young people that are going to lead this next juncture of the cultural landscape, how do we cultivate better navigators, not just better leaders? Because that's a very different dance, you know. And when I was thinking about this, it's like I'm thinking about people who know how to recognize possibility and then actually trust it. I mean, essentially, that's how momentum came to life. Like it started with conversations that my partner had been having for a very long time, and then in his relationship pocket of people, it deepened itself, and then possibility started to illuminate, and then trust continues to illuminate in different ways, and then the active actuality of changing the course because of that. So what should we be doing to cultivate better navigators and not just leaders?
I think one, decoupling art and arts organizations is a really important piece. That arts organizations have a very particular function, but they are not art in and of itself. And I think that's a really useful conversation piece. The other thing is, I think we can bring much earlier into people being acclimatized to what arts organizations do. I was running a nonprofit arts organization for 5 years before I actually understood that they did generally. I knew what I was doing every day, but I didn't necessarily understand they did until I started to have different kind of conversations with peers about how does this work happen? What is this work? What are all the different ways that I could be doing work like this, right? And I think actually bringing more of those conversations into people's early experiences with the arts, I think really shifts who understands they have a place in this space. I think there's so many of us who either growing up have no concept what happens within organizations. So a lot of us don't see ourselves there. And then you kind of look at the, demographics of who run these organizations and you're like, where are the Black people? That's the thing that I feel like, where are the Black people? There was probably nothing I saw growing up that made me think I was going to have that kind of job. And I had, my parents were academics. We went to museums, we went to the we went to the opera, and I knew I could be a performer. I knew I could be a creator. I had no idea I could be an ED, like, because I didn't know that was, a framework. And I think if I'd had that, I would have been thinking about my skill set very, very differently.
Yeah, that I grew up in the DMV area, District Maryland, Virginia, and so I grew up going to the Kennedy Center, Lincoln Theater, and performing in those spaces because of the childhood program I grew up in. And I actually didn't even know that there was an issue in American orchestras until I went to college because the program I grew up in was primarily Black and brown. So I grew up in an orchestra of Black and brown people. And so when I got to undergrad, I was like, am I in the right place? What is this? And that was when the whole thing came full circle for me, because as a child, my thought was, this is for everyone, because all I saw were people that looked like me, even the performers. Like I got to perform with Denise Graves and Leon Bates. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is for me. And then I got to undergrad and it was like, oh, no. This is not for me. This is for a subset of people. Right. And so and it's concerning because when you don't see yourself leading, how could you possibly think, hey, I can be a leader too. I can change the world too. I don't just perform. I can also perform in different ways and different strategies and bring other people along, because that's the piece that often falls off the wagon. When I did my response, I had talked about the fact that our field normalizes burnout and we call it a commitment. We normalize scarcity and call it resilience. We normalize fragility and call it innovation. my question to you is, what concerns you most, especially from your perspective as someone that's worked in the large institutions and also smaller nonprofits, and you built your own? What concerns you most about the stories our sector tells itself in order to make these unhealthy systems feel normal?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I love this entire conversation that we've been having because I think it speaks to um, how deeply entrenched we are in a way of working. Um, I think there's something about the story of getting to be an artist as being one sacrifice, right? One of constant work. Uh, I was very fortunate to be able to do multiple kinds of arts growing up. I was mostly into classical music. And what that says to you is that you are expected to just practice all the time. So it became very normalized for me, even, leaving classical music for a while, that I was just supposed to be working all the time, like literally. And there was nothing around me saying that wasn't the case because my friends also came out of the same space. My husband is also a classical musician. There was literally nothing to say to me, y'all are crazy. Like you actually can take a day off. Like none of this is okay. And even in other spaces, you see it where, in dance, like telling your body is normalized. In theater, people truly believe you're supposed to be broke. Like there is a way that we don't understand that all of these as conditions are inhumane. So then we can't actually come into any kind of professional spaces and problematize that we are asking somebody who just left college with $250,000 of debt to work for $30,000 and 60 hours a week and utilize their own networks because the whole thing is off, right? And I think we actually have to interrogate it itself from here.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I mean, it makes me think about when you're talking about how we're so deeply entrenched in this. But where do you believe our field has lost its imagination? Because it almost feels like we're stuck in like this. We're in a pipe where stuff is supposed to go through, but we just get stuck in the same way, and we're not imagining what could be possible. And then not only imagining the possibility, but then activating that possibility, like trying it out. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, awesome, because that's more information for us to interrogate. How do we shift the energy? How do we shift the cultural landscape and our language and how we show up for one another and how we care for one another, especially when we're fighting against the way technology is sort of, it's usurping a lot of our work and our ability to show up authentically as ourselves. So, where do you have a sense of where you feel like the field has lost its imagination?
And I actually want to take this question in two places.
Sure.
Because you said something about technology at the end that I think is I feel.
Yes.
One, I think this sort of capitalistic lens that everything has to be seen through in our country is probably, I don't think that's the right framework for it.
Okay.
And getting to live and work in China for a couple of years where that is not the starting point for anything, obviously, right? And seeing so many things flourish because no one had this expectation of this is supposed to generate money in the same way. Like there was actually an appreciation of culture on its own and the sense that we as a people should be supporting this because this is a reflection of who we are and what we value. And it was such a different way of understanding it. They just kind of blew my mind. And I'll be honest, I actually didn't want to leave because there were so many of the things that I knew the minute I came back home, I was going to have to go back into that sort of fight or flight mode just to be able to, just to write a couple of songs. It's like do little cute things that then suddenly had to exist against. But I live in New York City. So if I also can't make six figures appear in my bank account every year, like I'm literally going to be on the streets, right? And I don't know that you can create in that context and you use the term imagination. And I don't think that we have ever, I don't even think it is endorsed that we are allowed to imagine things outside of capitalism in this country. And that's the thing that I feel like we should be pushing back on. I think the technology piece is also really interesting to me because I love technology. I'm a millennial. I'm an Aquarian. Like it's just in me. I think gadgets are cool. Like I'm also a human, so I believe in tools. And I think about technology as a tool, like a fantastic tool. The reason it's so scary to artists is because we're always in scarcity mindset. So it's not far for us to think that like this thing is coming from a job. Because something is always coming for our job. It's not our understudy. It's literally the concept of audience is no longer thinking that ballet is supposed to exist, right? So I think it's pushing against us, but to me, it's more psychological than anything else. Right? It's like as a composer, I'm so excited about AI because I think it is going to be able to facilitate a certain type of research that I don't necessarily want to spend all of my time doing, right? That doesn't mean I want AI to be the only place where songs are being written. But I do kind of recognize that if we can't adapt to technology, everything is going to be sitting where opera is. And I love opera. But part of the reason why opera is dying is because it refuses to speak to right now, right? And I think we can't be in that mode.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. Recognizing that it's a tool and then thinking about it as a tool and not as like robbery, it hits a little different, you know. So I can appreciate that perspective for sure. As an elder millennial, I do not claim the full millennialism. I'm the elder hacker because I watched everything change. Like I think back to like I had cassette tapes. Like I used to record songs off the radio, but I used to be bored. Like now kids aren't bored. Like I used to sing it to the box fan because I was bored. So watching everything transform before your eyes and knowing what was and how do we keep pieces of that and protect it and take care of it, but also how do we learn how to flex our muscles and skill sets to open up and embrace some of the newness that's coming in responsibly, I should say. For the room, what responsibility do you think all of us carry, regardless of our title, regardless of our background, to help reshape our cultural ecosystem?
Honesty, right? Like I think being honest about how you experience the work, how you experience the sector, not pretending like we don't recognize that we exist in a broken business model. Working with Broadway artists right now, one of the things that is like the great bugaboo of theater in New York is New York real estate. Everything with real estate is so expensive, which is why it takes $26 billion to produce like a 3-person Broadway musical, right? Under that set of...
Did you say $26 million? For 3 people?
3 people, just the 3.
Just,
right? Like that. And then so people are constantly both in a space where nobody wants to take any chances and including pushing back at this isn't a way to produce. We need to figure something else out, right? And I came to this work after, doing some work for a while in academia, where, I was working with a lot of historically Black colleges and universities. And it was during a period where a couple of them had closed. So a bunch of them started looking at things like shared service models, even like if they were in the same city, Jackson State talking to Tougaloo about like what literal things can we share, can we share lawn care kind of a thing to like reduce the burden so that we're not putting this on the students. I actually think in the arts, there are more things that we can figure out like that, but it's very hard if we're telling ourselves a story that we're automatically in competition for every kind of resource, right? And it's not necessarily a false story, but if we don't stop letting that be the case, then we're not really going to be able to move beyond this. So
what was supposed to do?
Have conversations. I think just literally having honest conversations. It surprised me working in Minnesota, which has a different kind of community feel than New York City can. You can sort of wrap your arms around everything in the Twin Cities. How frequently we were talking, right? And I'm like, it's not like there are hundreds of other organizations to talk to. We could literally put the leaders of every one of them in this black box right now and have a different kind of a conversation about what sort of things can be accomplished together. And there may be very few, but if we identify 2, maybe there would be some kind of lessening of a burden. But I think even that is really challenging. Some of that is ego. Some of that is time because we're all working all the time. Some of that's because we don't necessarily like each other. You remember each other from grad school. But like, this is part of how we're solving these problems that are affecting all of us.
Yes. Yes. No, that honesty piece is real. And I don't think we have, as a field, have been really honest with ourselves about stuff, including like who we like. Like, just be honest. I don't like you either. So just keep it pushing. I'd love to make this a little personal, mainly because we're all human, and this space is, I believe, I feel it's safe enough, and I hope that we've cultivated a safe, grounded space here. But who have been lighthouse keepers for you? The people whose names you may not see in like bright lights or headlines, but like without them, your light maybe wouldn't have stayed on.
Absolutely. The most personal one is my mother. The person who most consistently says to me, "Why not?" When I'm thinking about there's a thing that I want to do, and I'm so afraid to do this thing. My last day at my job is on Tuesday. There are myriad reasons why I decided that I wanted not to continue being an arts administrator after 25 years of doing it. But the main reason was because I actually been supporting the creation of the work for a really long time. I kept thinking about, well, who's doing this for me? And the answer is supposed to be me. Like I'm supposed to be doing this for myself. And making that decision to release this after such a long time was very scary. And, I'm talking to my mother about this, and she's like, why? Right? And those kinds of conversations really do shift things in my head because, I trust her implicitly. And I also know that she's not going to lead me wrong, right? My mother's loving and supportive, but she also would like encourage me if I were like, I'm going to go for the NFL. She's like, no, don't do that. So her asking why in this moment was something that I really did. And then I have built a beautiful network of collaborators in New York who are people of color around my same age, mostly but not exclusively queer, with whom, in the context, the safe space of our, text chain, we can say things to each other that we can have the honesty that we can't have at work frequently, right? And we can support each other and we can hold each other accountable. We can call each other out. And the beautiful thing is we don't have to build the context for each other about why this is confusing, why I'm afraid, why this particular person is horrible. Like there is something that we are all able to support ourselves through. And I think those have been incredibly useful. And, last but not least, my very, very honest husband, whose honesty keeps me accountable to myself, who builds me up when I need to be built up, who reminds me to be humble when he decides that. But I think, generally, one of the biggest things that I've learned is that nobody is going to be anywhere by themselves, right? So I really try to surround myself personally with people who believe in what I'm doing and people who I believe in what they're doing. And then everybody else is just everybody else.
Okay, so this is my last question. So get y'all's questions ready. This is an open conversation. Okay, so imagine we're sitting here 20 years from now, still flat. And people are looking back at this moment in arts and culture. What do you hope they'll say we chose to illuminate? And what do you hope we finally had the courage to let go dark?
My goodness.
I know that's a big question.
No, it's a huge question. One, I kind of hope nobody remembers that we were here having this conversation today, because these kinds of problems are so far in the rearview mirror, right? Like, I mean, the entire 25 years I've been in a part of my arts career that I've been paying attention to this. we've been talking about the problem of the board, right? And I don't know that I think we're any closer to solving it. Like, I think we've done some very funny substitutions of it. I'm going to say something that's probably going to sound extremely unpopular, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've had some instances of working at organizations where we were like, the problem is that we don't have enough fill in the blank artists on the board, community members on the board, and then they get to the board, they start behaving like board groups, right? Because I think there is something about the center of gravity of being on a board, being in that kind of unaccountable position of power where people just start behaving in a certain kind of way. And it makes me feel like we just substituted one kind of wacky power dynamic for a different one with more people who identify like I do. And who outside of that context, you know, you take them for a drink and you're like, wow, you're lovely, you're drunk. Like, why is she like this? And I think it's because we just haven't wrestled with like there's a better way to produce art than what we're doing. So my hope is that in 20 years, if I am, you know, still alive and kicking it, Mother Earth hasn't kicked us all off, is that we are not even remembering that we were struggling to make sense of this kind of thing anymore.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Can we give Lee a round of applause for them? For them. I want to open